Why do you keep repeating the same relationship pattern over and over and over again? And you actually think the problem is the partner. You think you just keep choosing the wrong person. You think you have bad luck. You think maybe you missed some red flags. You think maybe you're just broken in relationships. No, that answer is lazy. And honestly, it's boring. It explains nothing. It's like trying to fix a structural foundation by repainting the front door. If you want to stay in the bad luck narrative, this video isn't for you. There are plenty of people online who will validate your victimhood. Go find them. But if you're ready to look at the math and the architecture of why your life looks the way it does, then stay here with me. Now, look, sometimes the partner is the problem, especially inside domestic violence. I've lived that life. I've been in rooms where the air is so thick with control, you can't breathe. I know what a predator looks like. I know the sound of the door locking. But here's the hard truth that people hate to hear: the partner is usually not where the pattern started. If something keeps repeating, especially in slightly different forms with different people, if you keep ending up with the same frequency in a different suit, then there's a structural integrity to that cycle. That's what we do inside my community. We don't do service level venting. We don't sit around talking about what he said or she said for 3 hours. We do forensics. We look at the actual roots. This is the entire backbone of my book, The Healing Matrix. Because once you start seeing the actual map you're following, the pattern stops feeling like a random loop and starts looking like the conditioning or learned behavior it actually is. It moves from being fate to being data. So here's a better question for you. And I want you to really sit with this. Don't look at your phone. Don't check your notifications. Just listen to the frequency of the question. When is the first time you ever felt like this? Not in a relationship, in your life. How old were you the first time you felt ignored? Again, not in a relationship, in your house. Standing in a doorway while adults were talking over you, like you weren't even there. Sitting at a table where nobody noticed you stopped speaking. Trying to get someone's attention and realizing the room had already decided you weren't important enough to interrupt for. You learned early that your presence was optional. How old were you the first time you felt like you had to earn love? Like being helpful made you safer. Like being quiet made you easier to keep. Like performing correctly, getting the grades, cleaning the room, being the good child meant you got to stay in the room. Like love was something you qualified for instead of something you received. You learned that love is a transaction, not a given. How old were you the first time you felt like your needs, your basic needs, human needs, were too much for the room to hold? Like your hunger, your sadness, or your questions were an inconvenience to the adults in charge. So you learned to make them smaller. You learned to starve so they didn't have to cook. How old were you the first time you stayed quiet just to keep the peace? And let's be real. How's that peace feeling about now? It feels like a cage, doesn't it? You're keeping the peace for everyone else while you're at war with yourself. You've spent 20, 30, 40 years being a peacekeeper in a war you didn't start. If this hits, leave me a comment. Pattern. Your brain doesn't care if you're happy. It doesn't care if you're fulfilled. It cares about survival. And to your brain, familiar equals safe. Even if familiar is a dumpster fire, In the middle of a hurricane, your nervous system is tuned to a specific frequency. You learned a love map before you could even drive a damn car, before you knew what a boundary was, before you knew what respect felt like, before you knew you were allowed to want something different. Your brain just recorded what connection looked like and said, this is the root. This is how it works. You learned that to be loved, you had to overgive until you were empty. Maybe you learned you had to tolerate the intolerable because at least they stayed. Guilty. Maybe you're just walking around grateful that someone wants you at all. You've settled for crumbs because you were told the bakery was closed. You don't say the sentences out loud at brunch. You don't tell your friends, I'm staying because I'm terrified of the silence. You say, he's just going through a hard time. But you live those sentences every night. That's the price you're paying for a map you didn't even draw. I know this because I had to walk this road. I didn't read this in a textbook. I bled for it. I was in domestic violence twice. From the outside, it's easy for people to say, well, you just picked the wrong guy. Again, lazy. That explains nothing. It doesn't explain why I recognize something unhealthy, and instead of running, I decided to decorate the room and call it a home. It doesn't explain why the red flags felt like home decor. I had to ask the harder question. Where did this frequency start? My first husband told me over and over again that I was lucky to have him, that I was too fat, too stupid, too nothing to ever be wanted by anyone else. For 15 years, that's what I heard. He was a parasite, sure, but a parasite can only live where the soil has been prepared. But he wasn't the creator of the voice. He was just the latest person to audition for the role. The voice was already there. He just recognized it faster than I did. And once someone learns the script you've been living inside, they don't have to invent anything new. They just repeat what's already familiar to you. They step into a vacancy that was already waiting. For me, that voice started with my grandmother. Different person, same frequency. She had spent years tilling that soil. She taught me, through her words and her silence, that my value was tied to my usefulness. That if I wasn't serving, I wasn't safe. By the time I met him, his abuse didn't sound like a warning bell. It sounded like a value system already understood. It felt like the natural order of things at the time. Now, make sure to save this video and share it with someone that needs to hear it. Sometimes you didn't even experience it directly. You watched it. You watched what your mother tolerated. You watched the way she shrank when a certain person walked in the room. You watched what your father expected, the entitlement, the silence, the demands. You watched who got listened to and who got ignored. And your brain filed that under normal long before you had the language to question it. You didn't just learn love. You learned the power dynamics of the household. You watched them survive, and you mistook survival for connection. People build entire lives around what they got used to, and I am one of them, and then have the audacity to call it personality. Oh, I'm just a people pleaser. No, bitch, you're not. You're a person who learned that if you aren't providing a service, you're expendable. Oh, I'm just the quiet type. No, bitch. You're a person who learned that loud people get punished. I'm just very independent. No, bitch. You're a person who learned that you couldn't trust anyone to show up for you. So you stopped asking. It's not your personality. It's learned behavior. It's a survival suit you've been wearing so long that you think it's your own skin. So what happens if we just strip it all away? If we take the fear, the roles, the performing, the silence? Who were you before someone else decided who you were supposed to be, before you were a people pleaser with zero boundaries or a burden. There's grief there. Let it come. There's going to be some anger. Good. Use that shit. That anger is telling you that the law you've been living under is a lie. Because once you see where it began, you can actually change what keeps repeating. You aren't stuck in a loop. You're just following an old map of a territory you don't even live in anymore. You can throw the map away. I did. You can resign from the role you never auditioned for. Here's a question. If a specific age is stuck in your mind right now, 6, 12, 15, whatever you are thinking about, drop that number in the comments. Let's see how many of us are actually carrying weight that never belonged to us in the first place. I promise you it started earlier, but it ends when you decide the pattern is no longer worth the price of your soul. I'll see you inside the Carly Moments community if you're ready to stop looking at the partner and start looking at the root. Stop painting the door and fix the foundation.